Hi there, Alexey Pashkov's here, and today our favorite way to pass time, deciphering the hidden meanings and secret messages within two masterpieces by my favorite artist, Van Eyck. You love doing that, I love doing that, so let's do it together, maybe? Okay, don't let this poor attempt at a joke avert you. I promise it will get more scientific from here. Can't promise it will get any funnier though. In any case, let's examine two paintings, perhaps the most well-known besides the Ghent altarpiece, which we will also explore but in another lecture. Those are the Madonna of Chancellor Rollin and the Madonna of Canon van der Pale. Both depict Madonna surrounded in one case by saints, and in the other she stands face to face with her benefactors, while angels delicately place a crown upon her divine head. So what's intriguing is that both scenes take place within the interiors of what appears to be a temple. Upon closer inspection, we can discern the intricate stone carvings on the capitals of certain columns. In the case of Madonna of Canon van der Pale, we also have four small sculptures adorning the armrests of the Madonna's throne. All of those images represent characters or scenes from the Old Testament. And of course, their placement within the painting is no coincidence. They hold a profound significance. We have discussed numerous times how during the Middle Ages a sophisticated system of interpreting biblical texts on multiple levels was developed. Those levels were literal, moral, allegorical, and so on. And we have explored how medieval intellectuals crafted an intricate and refined art of finding parallels between events of the New Testament and the Old Testament. And I have to say, I cannot help but admire the immense subtlety and mastery with which they sought out those parallels. I mean, those medieval nerds really knew their stuff. I actually have a course about the Old Testament narratives in paintings for children, in which I present this in a simplified manner. After all, children are children and we must adapt to their level of understanding. However, since I am addressing an adult audience now, I can challenge your intellectual capacities. So, prepare yourself for intense yet pleasant intellectual stimulation. Alex, you and your dirty jokes again, you might say. Alright, I'll try to quit. So, let us begin with the Madonna of Chancellor Rollin. So here, the images are smaller and located in the background on the stone capitals of two columns. Let's take a closer look at what is depicted there. Deciphering those images is actually quite easy. In this case, the artist simply tells us the story of the Old Testament from the very beginning. We can discern the expulsion of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden depicted on the far left. Next, we have the sacrifice of Cain and Abel. God looks favorably upon Abel's offering, and an angel descends from above, while Cain, disappointed, looks downcast. The next pair of figures represent Cain's murder of Abel. Notice how Abel lays sprawled on the ground and Cain strikes him on the head with a club. The artist then moves on to the story of Noah. In the background we can see a small ship. Clearly it is the ark, perhaps already docked at Mount Ararat. And closer to us, take a look. A man lays on the ground and another leans over him while two others observe from a short distance. This depicts Noah's intoxication. Again, remember, after the flood ended, they planted vineyards, harvested their first crop, made wine, and then, you know how it happens, Noah had a bit too much, fell asleep naked, after which one of his 3 sons left and mocked his father, while the other 2 respectfully covered him with the garment, cautiously avoiding seeing their father's shame. After this disrespectful son, named Ham, was expelled. So, at first glance, it may seem that there is no special intent to discern here. The artist is simply telling us the biblical story from the first book, from Genesis. However, what's interesting is the observation, which was not made by me. I wish it was made by me, but no. The great and terrible art historian Erwin Panofsky beat me to it, and I merely have the honor of reciting his conclusions to you. So, pay attention to the architecture of the space where Chancellor Roland and Madonna are located. Of course, it is some hypothetical space. We do not know if it depicts a real palace or a church. It doesn't seem much like a church, as there are balconies behind the colonnade offering a view of a river, so it's more likely fictitious, rather than a real space. But what is important is that the architecture is absolutely not contemporary for Van Eyck. As a reminder, he worked in the first half of the 15th century, an era of fully developed Gothic style. Yet, this space is absolutely not Gothic. The arches are semicircular rather than pointed, and the column capitals, entwined with the intricate laces and adorned with heads of fantastical beasts, are also not a Gothic element. This architecture is from an earlier Romanesque period. For Van Eyck, it was outdated, ancient, and decrepit. Decrepit in the same way as the Old Testament. And notice that it is precisely elements of this architecture that are decorated with scenes from the Old Testament. And actually, this pattern appears in several paintings by Van Eyck. I won't overwhelm you with the details now, but Panofsky has convincingly demonstrated that Van Eyck often associates this outdated Romanesque architecture with the Old Testament, while the more contemporary Gothic architecture represents the New Testament. So, in this particular case, we don't have Gothic architecture, but we do have Madonna holding Christ in her arms, surrounded by a building that embodies the previous stage of Christian teachings. And just like that previous stage, it may be outdated, but it served as the foundation for the birth of the New Testament. So you see, it's a complex idea expressed through a small detail and a subtle hint. Now let's move on to the second painting, Madonna of Canon van der Pale. Just to clarify, canon in this context refers to a certain rank within medieval church. So Canon van der Pale is a person who paid for the painting. Simple. So, first of all, let's note that Van Eyck employs the same technique here. Madonna is depicted in a Romanesque interior. Look at the capital of the column. It's purely Romanesque, not Gothic. On another capital, you can see 2 scenes from the Old Testament. However, in this case, Van Eyck doesn't start from the beginning or follow a chronological order. Instead, he immediately jumps to the story of Abraham and presents 2 episodes from that narrative. Take a closer look at the sacrifice of Isaac on the right, and lightly to the left, those are Abraham and Melchizedek. Remember from the Old Testament? Melchizedek is mentioned once as the priest of the living God who meets Abraham and presents him bread and wine as a gift. Both of those events were considered to be prefigurations of Christ in medieval theology. Why? Well, the sacrifice of innocent Isaac prefigures Christ, who is also innocent and who was sacrificed. As for Melchizedek, him presenting wine and bread is clearly alluding to the Holy Mass. Thus, in this case, Van Eyck selects subjects based on a different principle. They should be related to the thematic center of the painting, to Madonna and Christ in her arms. So, Van Eyck reminds us of the future fate of Christ and how the Old Testament books predict and prefigure his destiny. To ensure that we have understood him correctly, let's turn our attention to the figures on the armrests of the Virgin's throne. In the lower tier, everything is clear. Adam and Eve are depicted there. Let me remind you that Eve was considered a prefiguration of Madonna. Why? Because Eve is the primordial mother of all humanity, and Madonna, who brings forth Christ, who in turn gives hope of eternal life to all people, is also in this sense the primordial mother of all humanity. However, let me emphasize this important nuance, this interesting detail. In another sense, Madonna is the opposite of Eve. Eve, who succumbed to the serpent's temptation and plucked the forbidden fruit, thus introducing sin and death into the world, and Madonna, who also in a sense brings forth new life in the fruit of her womb, her son Christ, who again will vanquish death and make eternal life possible for humanity. So Madonna thus completes and cancels out what Eve has begun. Eve has destroyed humanity. Madonna returns it to life. She is a truly opposite to Eve. So it's a complex logic. And following that logic, Christ was considered a new Adam in medieval theology. So Adam and Eve are perfectly appropriate there. But what about the figures above them? Well, it's a little more tricky. Clearly, the man tearing the mouth of a lion is Samson. And this particular episode from Samson's life was always perceived as another prefiguration not only of Christ's crucifixion, but, most importantly, of his resurrection. You see, Samson's victory over the lion is a victory over death, symbolically. On the one hand, the devil is compared to a roaring lion seeking to devour human souls in the New Testament. On the other hand, the jaws of hell, which swallowed sinners, were often depicted in medieval art as a toothy mouth of some beast resembling a lion. Therefore, the association of the lion with hell, which literally consumes people but is vanquished by Christ, is only natural. And who is on the second armrest? Well, this is where the intricacies begin. Frankly, when I first saw this painting, I thought that Samson was also on the second armrest. You see, there is one person clearly killing another, and it appears to be done with the help of a bone. Look, he doesn't have a club in his hand. It seems that a bone is depicted there. In that case, it's clear that it's Samson who is beating the Philistines with the jawbone of an ass. Well, theoretically, this episode can be interpreted in the same way. It's a victory over a fierce enemy. But upon closer inspection, I realized that I was wrong. Firstly, usually when Samson and the Philistines are depicted, there is a whole bunch of enemies, a huge pile of bodies, to make it clear that according to the biblical text, Samson killed more than 1,000 of them with that very jawbone. Here, there is only one body. Secondly, if you look closely, you can see that different people are depicted. This microscopic style of Van Eyck, who truly achieved the superhuman precision in brushwork and accurately rendered the tiniest details, that allows us to distinguish, upon closer inspection, that the person wielding the bone has medium-length hair, while Samson has long hair. You see how it cascades down his shoulders makes me jealous every time. Furthermore, it is evident that Samson has a small beard, whereas the second person is clean-shaved. Therefore, it's not Samson after all. In that case, we are left with only one option: Cain and Abel naturally. The fact that Cain is holding a bone does not contradict this interpretation. Cain was indeed sometimes depicted using a jawbone as a weapon. Why? That is a topic for another conversation. So don't miss my future lectures and I will tell you all about it. Yeah, I'm a master of suspense. In any case, Cain and Abel also make sense here because they represent the story of the first sin. Well, technically the first sin was disobedience of Adam and Eve, but that was a sin against God. However, the first sin between humans, the first crime, the first murder, and the first physical death in human history, that's precisely Cain and Abel. It is logical that Van Eyck places this symbol of the first sin next to the little Christ. It's an antithesis. Through Cain and Abel, sin manifested itself in the world, but through Christ, the power of sin will be negated and humanity will be liberated from it. So, hopefully, after this lecture, medieval art will make a little more sense to you. Of course, I have much more to say on the topic, but I don't want to overwhelm you. So, please do not miss my next lectures and my next letters, because I have so much more in store for you. And hopefully, I will see you in my next video.